Rafael looked at the boy, still not understanding what was going on. The boy, with a serious but at the same time sad expression, was still standing on the sidewalk. He didn't seem bothered by the people rushing past, ignoring his presence, as if the world around him didn't exist. There was only that moment. There was only Rafael and that warning, which, however absurd, seemed genuine. The businessman hesitated, not knowing whether to listen to the boy. Is he just asking for money? He thought. But the look in the boy's eyes bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. There was such a strong conviction and indescribable certainty, as if the boy knew something that he, Rafael, didn't know. Something important. Something vital. For a moment, he wondered what might happen if he didn't really pay attention. He knew that his Bentley was a luxury car, expensive and well-maintained, but what the boy was saying made sense. He had just had it serviced and the car was in perfect condition, or was it? Was he exaggerating? The boy looked no older than 11, a homeless kid who no one would give anything to. But there was something in his eyes that couldn't be ignored. Perhaps it was the desperation of someone who had lived longer than his age, someone who had seen things that an adult could never imagine. The boy, sensing Rafael's hesitation, took a step forward. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't even trying to draw attention to himself. He just looked at the car, and then at Rafael, with a calm that was strange for someone in his situation. "There won't be time for you to get out of here in time," said the boy. "You will realize when it's too late." These words cut through the silence of the street, like a muted scream. Rafael still thought about ignoring it, but on some level, he knew something was wrong. His body began to react, as if it were being pushed by an invisible force, something that made him turn the car around and look at the tires, the doors, the windows. But everything seemed in order. He pulled away, trying to shake off the growing feeling of unease. He got into the car, still not knowing what to do. It was a difficult feeling to describe, but he knew he couldn't just ignore the boy's warning. But how could he trust someone like him? A homeless, hungry, barefoot boy. Rafael started the engine, but a shiver ran down his spine. He was trying to push away the thought that was beginning to form in his mind. Why would a boy, seemingly with nothing, talk about something so specific? "Your wife cut the brakes," he had said. Rafael laughed nervously. How could the boy know that? What was he trying to do? Or worse, what did he want? The answer was about to come, but in a way that Rafael would never have imagined. He started the car, still feeling that something wasn't right, but forcing himself to ignore it. The car's engine roared softly, as if inviting Rafael to trust it. He thought about moving on, going about his routine. After all, he had an important meeting and couldn't be late. But the boy, his eyes fixed on the car, was still there, in the same position. Like a presence that wouldn't go away, like a shadow that couldn't be ignored. Rafael accelerated, and as the car picked up speed, he felt safer. Perhaps it was just an impression. The boy was just trying to attract attention. He couldn't let it get to him. But then, on a sharp bend, everything changed. The car shook unexpectedly, the steering wheel became heavier, and he had to force himself to keep control. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the engine. Something like a low, continuous rumble, followed by a hiss. Rafael looked in the mirrors at the surrounding streets and realized that he was losing control. At first, he didn't understand. What was happening? Why weren't the brakes responding as they should? The road was empty, but he felt that, at any moment, the car could veer off the road. Faster and faster. More and more difficult to control. He began to realize what the boy had said, and in a split second, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. What if the sabotage was real? What if the boy knew something he didn't? Rafael didn't know what to think. The car seemed to be out of control, and the feeling of panic was palpable. He tried to step on the brake, but the pedal felt strange, resisting, as if something was jamming it. The sound of the engine growing and the sight of the road becoming increasingly blurred in his eyes made his heart pound harder. "It can't be," he muttered, trying to think. He felt adrenaline coursing through his veins, confusion mixed with a growing sense of urgency. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, but the car seemed to have a life of its own, gliding through the streets unpredictably, as if it had an external force controlling it. It was then that he realized, out of the corner of his eye, that something was about to happen. The car was heading straight for a sharp bend, and there was no time to brake. Rafael tried to turn the steering wheel, but he was powerless. The car wouldn't obey. The sound of the asphalt scraping against the tires, the feeling of helplessness, and the realization that everything was happening in slow motion, but every second faster. He thought of his wife, his children, his life, and for a moment, he wondered if he would make it out of there unscathed. At the last second, he saw the curve in front of him. There was no avoiding it. Rafael felt his body being pulled to the side, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it wasn't normal. A primal instinct took hold of him. I need to get out of this, he thought, but a part of his mind knew it was too late. He had no control. He was at the mercy of something much bigger, and fear was now taking over his being. The car made a horrible sound as the tires slid across the road, but to his surprise, it didn't roll over. Not immediately. Instead, it crashed into a tree. The force of the impact was so great that Rafael was thrown forward, but luckily his seat belt held him up. He felt a stabbing pain in his chest and ribs, but he was still alive. Smoke began to spread through the cabin, and the smell of fuel began to invade his lungs. Rafael didn't know how long he would have before the situation got worse. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. The heat and smoke forced him to act quickly. He was dazed, but his survival instinct was still intact. The first thing he did was try to use his cell phone, but the screen was broken. There was no signal. I'm stuck, he thought, feeling the weight of the situation. Every breath was an effort, and the pain in his ribs only increased. He looked around, his vision blurred by the smoke and the fear becoming almost unbearable. It was then that he remembered the warning the boy had given him. Did he know? Did he know something was wrong with the car before I got in? Rafael could no longer think straight, but a feeling of guilt began to invade his mind. And suddenly he thought of what the boy had said about his wife cutting the brakes. What does that mean? How could he know that? The idea seemed absurd, but what was happening wasn't. Rafael fought against the pain and tried to free himself from the car. He forced the door once more. Nothing. He slammed his hands on the steering wheel, feeling a growing frustration. With every second that passed, the heat increased. He knew he didn't have much time. Panic began to mix with something deeper. The feeling that he was no longer in control of his life. The side of the road no longer made sense. The world seemed to spin, but somewhere in the distance, he still remembered the boy. He knew Rafael thought, trying to concentrate, trying to understand. What had happened there? How did a child, homeless, with nothing, know something so specific? And why would his wife cut the brakes on the car? He didn't want to believe what he was thinking, but there was no other explanation for what was happening. That's when he noticed the reflection of something bright. The light of a car approaching on the road. I need to get out of here, he thought. With a final effort, Rafael managed to push the door open. He fell to the ground, dazed and without strength, but he was out of the car, away from the smoke. For a few seconds, he lay there on the asphalt, trying to process everything that had happened. The sound of screeching tires and the impact still echoed in his mind, but he was alive. He had managed to get out. But the feeling of helplessness didn't go away. He stood up, leaning on a nearby tree. The car was still on fire, and the last thing he heard was a distant siren. But in his mind, he couldn't stop thinking about the boy, his words, the warning. How could someone so young, with no resources, know he didn't? The distant sound of the siren drew closer, but what really made him shudder was something much closer, something he would never have imagined could happen. Suddenly, the boy appeared. The 11-year-old black boy appeared from the shadows, as if he had emerged from the very chaos he had just faced. He approached Rafael with a determined look, almost as if he knew exactly what to do. Wordlessly, the boy knelt down next to Rafael, who was still panting, sweating, and completely lost. He looked at the boy, still trying to understand how that boy had somehow gotten involved in all this. Rafael breathed heavily, and the boy, with impressive calm for someone so young, looked in the eye and said, simply, "I told you so." The sound of those words echoed in Rafael's mind like thunder, but he was so stunned that he didn't know how to respond. He wanted to ask how the boy knew what was going on, why he had said that, but before he could formulate any questions, the boy looked at the car that was still on fire. The fire was starting to spread more quickly, and a sense of urgency gripped Rafael. But you knew that, Rafael managed to say, his voice shaking. You knew something was wrong with the car. How? The boy didn't answer immediately, but the look in his eyes seemed to say it all. It was as if he had seen this scene before, as if he had experienced it somewhere at some time. He wasn't there by chance. And that's when Rafael noticed something even more disturbing. The boy was holding a small piece of metal in his hands, like a key, a broken key. He looked at Rafael and said, with frightening coldness, "It's not just the car. Your wife, she's not who you think she is." These words hit Rafael like a bomb. Everything inside him seemed to lock up for a moment. What do you mean, his wife? He had been married to her for years. They had children together. How did that boy know something about her that he himself didn't? What are you saying? What do you mean? Rafael asked, trying to get up, but the pain in his body still stopped him. The boy, however, didn't move. He just stood there motionless, with that penetrating look in his eyes, as if he was waiting for a reaction. He then calmly put the broken key away in his pocket and, in a low tone, said, "I didn't want you to believe me. I just wanted to save your life." He paused. "But now you'll understand." Rafael was completely lost, but something inside him, a force he didn't know he had, pushed him to act. He stood up, ignoring the pain, and began to move towards the fire that was still consuming the car. The boy watched him from afar, as if seeing him do something inevitable. What else could be happening there? The car, which had been the key to all the drama, was still on fire, but Rafael no longer had any doubts. Something was very wrong. His mind, in an instant of clarity, began to put the pieces together. He had been thinking about the boy's words all along, and it was there, at that moment, that it all made sense. The brakes, the wife, Rafael muttered to himself. He didn't want to believe it, but a cold sensation ran down his spine. He remembered the last time he had spoken to his wife, when she had told him that he needed to sell the car. She never wanted him to drive that model. She always said it was too old, that he couldn't afford to keep it. She was doing something else, something much more serious than simple concerns about the safety of the car. Rafael, now in total panic, ran to the car and tried to open the driver's door, but it was locked. He knew he had little time. That's when the boy appeared once again, as calmly as someone who already knew what to do. He held out his hand to Rafael, not out of fear, but with a strange knowledge that he could do it. Without a word, he looked Rafael in the eye and, with a simple gesture, showed him what was happening. The brakes, which had been cut, were not broken by chance. They had been sabotaged. But who would do that? Who was behind it? Rafael looked at the boy, now with a mixture of terror and gratitude. He knew that the boy had been sent there to save his life. The boy's story and the truth behind the sabotage of his car were yet to come. What he would do now was a mystery, but one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. Silence overtook the room, and Rafael, still in shock, stood there, trying to process everything that had happened. The boy, with his attentive eyes, seemed to be waiting for him to understand the gravity of the situation. Rafael finally began to understand that the truth, harsh as it was in front of him. His wife, the woman he trusted, was not who he thought she was. She wasn't just concerned about the car or his well-being. There was something much darker involved, and the boy, with his unexpected courage, was the key to saving her life. Rafael looked once more at the boy, who, in an almost solemn gesture, slowly walked away. He knew he had done his part. It was no longer necessary to stay there. The boy had fulfilled his mission, and now he was leaving without seeking recognition or thanks. Rafael, for his part, felt a mixture of gratitude and despair. How could he be so blind? How had he not noticed the signs before? Lies, betrayal, and manipulation were in every corner of his life, and he hadn't noticed. Everything seemed clear now, as if the fog had suddenly cleared. With the sirens approaching, Rafael felt he had to act. The police and paramedics would arrive soon, but he knew that his life had already changed forever. He needed to confront his wife, find out the truth, and, above all, protect himself. The boy, with his warning, had opened Rafael's eyes to a world of deceit that he had never imagined possible. He knew that what came next would be difficult, perhaps even more painful than the accident itself, but now he was prepared to face the truth. That boy's story, the courage he had shown in risking everything to save a complete stranger, would remain etched in Rafael's mind forever. He finally understood that sometimes the greatest act of kindness comes not from those you expect, but from those you least imagine. And as much as Rafael's life would never be the same again, he knew that from that moment on, he would be stronger, more attentive, and better able to deal with any challenge that fate brought him. The boy had given him a new start, a chance to rebuild everything that was about to fall apart. Just for those of you who like a good story and have watched to the end, leave your comment below from which city you're watching, and I'll leave a heart in your comment. Bye, and see you in the next video.